Welcome to the Divergent AF podcast. I'm your host, Selena Thompson, a late diagnosed ADHD mother on a hashtag journey to unapologetic authenticity. Dive into the rabbit hole realness with me as we overshare unfiltered and relatable stories of what neurodivergent life is really like. Lifting the lid on the honest, hilarious, and heartbreaking topics typically confined to our inner monologue. Get ready to feel seen and heard as we ditch the to-do list, the daily planners, but most importantly, the shame. Welcome back to the Divergent AF podcast. I'm your host, Selena Thompson. Today's episode is part 2 of my chat with sociologist and fellow ADHD'er Dr. Natalie Mathews. In this episode, we delve more into executive functioning and also making sense of our neurodivergent experiences.
When someone said, oh, you've got to try hard, how do you know that you're trying hard is what they mean by trying hard? You're very rarely at that point where you just have to stop. Like, that's why I love that moment with the lockdown about what's because, so try meditating. I was like, oh, I'll try exercising or go out in nature. I'll do like checklist. And I did these for more than one day at a time. Like, to be clear, let's stack them. And every day, this is how I'm going to beat
you
this.
Would have treated this like a proper experiment. Like, no variables, just one at a time, Yeah.
I reckon it's like a desperate person that was going to throw absolutely everything at it at once and hope that at least something worked. I couldn't give up. There was literally no way out of it. My child was there. I couldn't get rid of it. Don't worry, I didn't want to really, but there's no
guys,
actual
we love
chance.
our kids,
No actual chance of a proper break, right? The work needed to be done. And if it didn't get done, then could I ever be invited back again to work again? Am I is this the end of my career? Because there was no backing out. Like I just did keep on pushing. I knew I pushed all I could. And for the last few weeks, my sense of time is on, but for a significant chunk of it, I was physically shaking by 11. Like I was just sort of, I couldn't. And it was trying to stop myself shaking, just stop doing that. That's not helping, stop it. Yeah. And what I loved about that was it was just such an indication that I literally could not have tried harder and made it stop. Because without the indication, there's always those little moments but I relaxed a bit last night. And, I could have spent that 10 minutes between those things tidying, and I could have done this. And, you can come back in any day, you can think, here's how, if I were a super being, I could have optimized this better. So maybe actually everyone's optimized everything, everyone else does that, and I'm just bad because I haven't.
Do you feel like there's always this feeling following you that you just haven't done enough?
Yeah, absolutely.
Always, and it's like, sometimes I would actually stop down and think, I actually probably am way more productive than that neurotypical, but it's like you just have this chronic feeling of you can't relax.
Yeah, absolutely.
When I sit down, you're just lazy dickhead. You're never doing enough. You're never doing enough. We have this monkey on our back at all times, and I don't know why.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So actually, when I got diagnosed, the psychiatrist said, once you've had medication, if it's working for you, you actually will be more able to relax in the evening because you'll feel like you've done enough.
Accomplished more executive function tasks.
Accomplished more, right? Just the sense of not having to, a lessened sense of not having to catch up. The urgency of holy shit, I've got to do so much to be try to be the minimum today. Yeah,
to just be a human,
and so many people, human. My husband's been really good, and he was just like, you work so hard. Do you not notice that you work so hard? And it's like, no.
We're so hard on ourselves. And why is that? Because I feel like even when you're saying we really berate ourselves and we just don't move on from it. And it's just this real criticism of ourselves.
But the thing is, though, is that there isn't really a narrative for understanding that brains are finite. Think of it as the cult of willpower. It's so pervasive that just work hard, just do more. But this isn't just an us thing, right? This is also just floating around, that there really isn't a lot of language to say, no, actually your mind is finite. You can't do everything 100% all of the time.
I wonder if that's because when you think about it, there's not enough information about the brain. Is it Dr. Amen? He was the first one to be like, why are we not doing brain scans? With mental health disorders. Why are we not looking at it?
Like, there's this huge drive to try and get something that sounds scientific. Like, otherwise it's suspect. If you don't have an image, if you don't have a number that's associated with it, then there's always that sort of question of, but is this really?
Well, I think with...
Probably not. You're probably making excuses.
Yeah, I think with looking at his work that he's done with ADHD, looking at the firing in the brain. But then I had this moment of thinking, oh, that'd be so good to get done. But then another part of me was like, oh God, no, imagine if I had a normal brain.
Yeah.
I actually don't want to know. Let's just do self-report ADHD because that could be worse for me.
What's left over? I'm a shit human.
Let's just go with self-report, Yeah. So, and skill reports and stuff. Let's just stick with that.
We've got this first explanation, right, that you always get given, it's effort. And so because you can't touch effort and you can't see effort and you can't compare effort, like it's sort of an endless possibility unless you're lucky enough to have those moments where you're like, oh no, like I fully recognise that effort cannot be any more. Okay, this is real now because it wasn't real until that moment. And that idea of laziness, right? And it's such a thing. That's a trigger word for how many ADHD people is lazy because you know. And you also know that sometimes what looks like a lot of effort to you looks like nothing to people from the outside. Yeah, things that are really, really, really hard for us, like sorting out your sock drawer or something horrendously nightmarish like that, took so much brain power. I have like a million breaks. I have to call someone on the phone and chat to them so I can do it at the same time. Do you know what I mean? It's actually a really hard task. Or have the best system sock drawer sorting ever. Then there's techniques, right? So, maybe there's a way that everyone's doing it that I'm not doing. Like maybe I'm just doing it weird. Yeah, that's another thing. It's like maybe it's just me. I had so many cleaning systems that I've tried. Like I got really into Fly Lady for a while. What's Fly Lady? There's no flies. I can't even remember what she's doing now. Really? Okay, but what is the system? You start off with scrubbing your sink, and that's the first day. Is you've got to make sure that every single day your sink is super, super shiny. And then you start to sort of add things that you do each day onto that. So, like, it might be the sink, and then it's, so no matter what, your sink is beautiful. And it's like, okay, there's sink, and then the bed. Like, I've got this thing about making the bed. Like, I don't make. But then for some people, they're like, oh no, you're like making your bed is emblematic of order in your life. And you'll feel so much better if you make your, set you up right for the rest of your life if you make your bed every morning. Like, you don't. You just... Well, that's what I watched this. I watched this 19-minute motivational speech by a Navy SEAL. What I've learned throughout life: make your bed every day, and like that rides my back every morning. That's so weird, eh? Like no one even comes to my house except you. I hold on to the bed thing. It's like brushing my teeth. If I am late and I've rushed out of my bed, I'm depressed all day. Just knowing that's weird, isn't it? That is a bit. Oh, okay. I know what happens. Like I think it's, because it becomes a symbol of competence. And what's your symbol? Do you have one symbol at home? No. Yeah. I think, like, for me, like, the non-negotiables are sort of the relational things that... Did you say hello to your husband? Yeah. Just like the basics, back to basics. But, like, there's so many of those little systems, right? And then you fall off the wagon. And you fall off the wagon and you relapse. What's this bus in, bus out? That when you go into a room, you take things into the room that need to go in that room, and you take things out of that room that need to go out of that room. Oh, yeah. I'm really bad at that because I just ping-pong ball all around the house. It's actually really not efficient at all. Yeah. But it's a good way to get your steps in. So, yet another area of one's life that one can always be bad at. So just systems for cleaning. And just the sense that, like, maybe if I find the right system, then everything will make sense and it'll be fine. And so I went through periods of asking people that seem to have their life together, like, what do you do? How did you phrase it? I just do that. I just say, like, how do you write? What's your technique? Or, whatever. And what would your responses be? Did you pick the right people to ask? No, because, usually then people are just like, sometimes people are like, oh, I just do this thing, and it'll be something that I've already done. Sometimes it's like, I just do it. So, I went through a period of just asking people, like, how do you not get affected by other people's opinions? I would see people just not, and I'm like, so how do you do this? Like, probably there's just a technique that I am not using. No, nobody ever told me, but probably someone told all the other people, and they did. It's that I just do it. Because it's just inherent, unconscious. It does reflect this idea then that maybe there is a difference that wasn't even named. Because that's the last one, right? Like, okay, there must be something about me. But like, what the hell is that? We're in New Zealand. We're not allowed to talk about individual differences.
Yep.
Like, if we say that there's something about us that helps us, well, that's bragging. Like, you don't do that. You don't talk about are you saying you're better than other people? Are you saying you're special? But if you have a characteristic that makes things harder, well, that's making excuses. Don't go on about that. Just do it. Stop. Imagine if you do really well at something. How are you allowed to explain that to the rest of the world? I did well at this because...
I don't look at it as bragging. I think, if anything, we need to do it more because we're so harsh on ourselves.
Often the only way you're allowed to say that you did really well at something is, oh yeah, I tried really hard, right? Like, you're allowed to say, I put in the yards. You're allowed to say effort, but you're not allowed to say, oh, I'm good at this kind of thing. I just happen to be.
You can't just be like, I'm incredible at pattern recognition, or I'm incredible at numbers.
You're not allowed to acknowledge that. You're not allowed to talk about ethnicity. You're not allowed to talk about gender, because all of that, if it's bad, if it's challenging, then you're just making excuses. Well, yeah, so this is just our neoliberal context, right? Is that everyone can make it if they just try hard. You're not allowed to talk about individual differences. It's really weird. And we've kind of got intelligence in this background thing where we're not allowed to talk about it. That's really bad taste, and you're saying you're better than other people. But it's also kind of assumed.
Yes, you must get that all the time as well.
Well, I see it so often also. And I see it when people talk about some people sometimes, it's like, well, they're so smart, I don't get why they can't do it. Yeah, because there are other brain differences that aren't to do with intelligence. That's a completely different brain function, but we don't have the language to talk about that. Yeah, for me, learning about executive function and this idea that it is just as inherent and just as physical as height, it's there. But you're not allowed to, there's no words for it. And that was crazy to me, because I think I sort of thought that if I could think myself to having better executive function somehow. I could just, I'd find the right strategy, and you think that strategy is like an intellectual thing, right?
Yeah.
Or I would find the right mind frame.
I feel like executive function is almost treated like a skill that anyone can work on and anyone can improve and anyone can master.
Yeah, it's this great big moral thing, yeah.
Yeah.
So then what is it? It's willpower, grit.
Yeah.
There's this real celebration of
Methods.
it. It's never where does that come from? Apart from you've got to put in effort, okay, you've got to work in it. But no matter, using muscles as an example, yes, when you exercise your muscles, they get stronger, and if you don't ever use them, then they get weak. Okay, that's a thing. But you're never going to make a weak muscle act like a strong muscle. You can modify it within the limits of its characteristics, but you're not going to change it. Yeah. But I just had this sense that I just got it right, and then I will be just like everybody else. I had an excellent student presentation on dieting the other day, and very much that also, right? That it's just simple. It's just willpower. It's just calories in, it's calories out.
It's how much you want it as well. Do you want it enough?
Yeah. Yeah, right mindset, right? And differences in what bodies do with calories based on depending on hormones, depending on thyroids, depending on all these stuff. These are real and these exist, but you're definitely not allowed to talk about them because that's making excuses. And if they're going in your favour, you're not allowed to talk about that either, because that just makes everyone feel bad.
Everything can be changed or fixed.
If you just try hard enough, right? And so therefore, if something's going wrong with your life, well, it's because you haven't found the right thing. You haven't done the right thing. You haven't tried hard enough.
You haven't done your vision board.
On you to do it. Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing about ADHD in particular is, going back to my feeling when I joined one of those Facebook groups, that maybe everyone's just really honest about failing at life. All of the things that are, so much of what is valued right now are... I can see it's connected to executive function, right? It's don't be impacted by other people's opinions of you. You're meant to be strong, and you're meant to have, and to be affected by other people's judgments is a weakness of some sort. You're meant to strategize, right? So they talk about the ideal citizen now as being like an entrepreneur. You've got to keep on sort of looking for opportunities and optimizing. You've got to self-optimize all the time. You're never allowed to stop.
Yeah, but then on the flip side, I do believe, because this is kind of my problem with my resume, is that I think when I think of me and I look at my CV, my progression, I would last at things like 18 months. That would be max. I'm so depressed and bored. and then I want to go and do this, and then I want to start a storage development company, and then I want to start a podcast, then I want to do a PI course, and I'll start a PI firm. But to anyone else, it's like that's flaky, and you can't stick at anything. So and it's kind of like you can evolve, but you can't evolve like that radically. Like that's way too different, you know.
Well, and also it needs to be strategic, right? Like don't do anything silly. Don't do anything and just hope. It's got to be like
it's got to have a progression of like, oh, that makes sense. Oh, that makes sense. Whereas I'm like, dong, dong, dong. Like, none of it is connected at all. But so in my head it is.
Then you've got your day and you've got to optimize that. You've got to have a side hustle.
Oh, yeah, side hustles are very on trend.
Hustle, yeah. Do you have a primary hustle or is your what's... It's just a job, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, you don't call it your primary hustle, eh? Would it just be hustle and then side hustle? A side hustle is
optimize yourself. Optimize.
It's like the next step up. Oh, I've got a side hustle and I've got kids. You can't just do one thing and barely get by anymore.
You can't just do one thing. You've got to live life defined by paying attention to what's around you, task switching to like address what's going on there. Keep your life in order. Remember the daily tasks. The things that are valorized, right, are so what we are not. Be strategic, be disciplined, be optimizing.
Read the school emails properly. Get the wheels day right. Get the uniform right.
Yeah.
That's another thing we always bond over. I'm running late and I'm like, mate, I'm not even there either. We need like a neurotypical, hey, can you get our kids? We're late. Both of us.
But isn't it then crazy to think that a lot of these characteristics that are like expected of an okay citizen are also connected to this thing that is biologically influenced to a huge degree and really unevenly distributed?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what you just said.
Oh,
it's no. Smart. No, it was just very long.
A lot of these hinge on characteristics that some people have lots of and some people will have not many of.
And it should be kind of accepted as a variation of normal, and that's normal.
But you're absolutely not allowed to talk about this as a variation unless you go, oh, but it's a medical thing and I've got a doctor's note. And then it starts to be okay. But even then you're making excuses.
Are you outbrained now? We've been doing well. Look at us.
I guess also actually just thinking about like there's no language, but there is also sort of vague ideas. They're also super unhelpful, particularly this idea of strength, right? It's just got these connotations of like, okay, here's how you build strength and you just do it. And you do it over and over again and then you'll get better at it. And I think what a lot of us find is that we do it over and over again and we just take damage every time.
Yeah, and we internalise. We always seem to internalise when things aren't working. It's like this fucked up little habit that we do where a lot of people might be like, oh, just, you know, because of external reasons, but we internalise it from birth. I don't know. I don't know where it comes from. I just even think back to when I was a kid, just always internalising anything that went wrong and didn't work out for me.
It's not wrong in that I'm different and I can like negotiate with that like it's a real thing. I'm just sort of vaguely, abstractly wrong.
I think because I'm not sure if you felt this, but ever since I had consciousness, I knew that I was different from other people. I just always knew I was different, but I couldn't tell anyone I was different because that's weird. But I just always...
I think you're special, Selena.
You have to say that, you're my mate. No, I always knew that I was different. We don't go around talking about this stuff, especially when you're a kid. Like, okay, this is a great example. This is burned into my memory, these traumas. But I remember year one, we were taught how to play Duck, Duck, Goose during that game.
Yeah.
And I clearly wasn't listening, or it was too many steps at once. And I didn't know how to play. And so I had to have a sore stomach and go home. And I remember it because my dad was furious because he, you know, was a very important lawyer in a meeting that had to come and get his daughter that always had stomach problems and always had sore tummies. And it was all because I was too embarrassed. And I'm too weird and everyone else knows, so I'll just go to the sick bay. Kids are cruel little cunts.
But like adults are cruel too. Like this is what gets me then is that, okay, now there are so many little techniques then that are starting to talk about executive function and are starting to talk about differences and characteristics and stuff. But then this is in this weird context where most of the time it's monetized. Most of the time it's someone hoping to like just be okay at life by getting enough money by telling you about this kind of thing, giving you their solution.
Yes. And I hate that, and that's what I don't like. Side note, I hate people monetizing on vulnerable people, in terms of, vulnerability where, they're bad at executive functioning or they can't let go of trauma. They're predators, I think, in that area, and I hate that.
Well, some of it's absolutely predatory, but it's also like if you were spending so much of your life trying to work this shit out, then like once you actually think you've got some kind of a system where like if everyone's so unsafe fundamentally that you're not allowed to be like, that's a nice side project, it was interesting, have some free information, everybody. But there's also this like, but shouldn't you make money off this? Like it's not really, the winds of debt are sort of howling out there, and this might be something that will give you a little bit of safety, just by, making use of all this time you put in anyway, because you've got to, obviously, as a good citizen, you've got to make a good financial use of all your time. You can't just be really into something and be into something.
Well, that's what I do. Like this podcast, 100%, this is my life. Do I make money? No. I'll probably feel bad if I ever made money. I'm purely passionate about this. I am pure passion.
Then you've got these two competing discourses. Like one that's like, good, you're making art, well done. And the other is like, then we've got people talking about these differences. But it's this context of then everyone's got a scheme and bringing it back to meaning making. I wish there was a better mainstream account of what's going on. It's not one of many conflicting accounts for a human is. It's not something that somebody is hoping that you'll believe because then they can sell something to you. I just hope that the overall narrative just comes to recognise that there are features of brains that differ. But I also think that there are real strong political reasons why that's kind of always going to be pushed back against. Because you're not allowed to talk about difference. That would give up the whole illusion that we're all just competing on a level playing field, and we are in fact competing with each other.
I think doing this episode, this is what you've kind of accomplished in our very small way, talking about it.
Well, yeah, and
no one else is. We may as well.
Well, and that's like hopefully the thing is that this just becomes more mainstream, that people talk about.
100%. That's my vision. My purpose in life is just normalising our experiences, normalising our whole neurodivergent, especially experiences, that it just becomes just so inherent and just so accepted. Of course, your daughter can't be in that room. It's like really noisy. Of course she didn't get a good grade. It was the noise. Just stuff like that. No?
Absolutely. But just to highlight then that like this has real implications, right? Like, so thinking about, say, sitting through a really long lecture. Like actually nobody does that well. People say to me at parties, because it's the kind of parties I go to, like, do you think I've got ADHD? Because I sort of phase out during my lectures. And actually, like, everybody does. I did a course on tertiary teaching where they had this nice little graph that's like, 20 minutes in, most people are gone.
20?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow,
so the idea then is, but then you modify it, right? And so you break up your activities. You don't just have one person talking at you indefinitely. The myth then that humans are just kind of infinite, like that's damaging to absolutely everyone, right? Some people survive and some people don't. Some people are fine with it. I kind of like lectures because I like learning stuff, but that's just me.
Your natural ability is a knowledge seeker. Yeah,
and I can make it rewarding. But so it's not just that it suits like the majority, but it doesn't actually suit the majority. And so acknowledging then like that humans are finite and limited and therefore these things need to be taken into account, or acknowledging things like noise pollution, right? Or acknowledging things like actually lights are good for no one and it's going to knock out some people and it's going to drill into some people's brains in a way that they've got to leave, but actually
having the big light on.
Yeah, the bloody big light.
You want to wear sunnies, but then you look like you've just been on a bender, You can't win.
Let's not do 2 hour lectures. I think we're at 1 minute 36 now.
Okay, I'll wrap this up. Thank you, Natalie, for joining me on this episode. We've got a lot to work with. I feel like we had some amazing conversations, as we always do. I love doing my Nat Chat. I learned so much from you. And we go on a lot of tangents and it's acceptable and it's a safe place. Thank you for joining me, and I know that people's minds will be expanding after they listen to you.
Thank you so much for having me on. That was fun, and I love that you're doing this.